What is going on, guys? Timothy Drew Games here, and in this tutorial I'm going to be teaching you how to make flowing water in the Blender game engine. So let's get started with that. So the first thing I'm going to do is delete the default cube, and then I'm going to add a plane. Then I'm going to hit numpad 7 to go into top view and S10 to scale the plane up to about this size. Then I'm going to hit tab to go into edit mode and hit W to subdivide this plane a few times, something around there. And basically we're going to use this plane to create the terrain that our water is going to flow through. So then we're going to deselect everything by pressing A, and we're going to press C, and you'll see we have this little selection tool showing up now. So we're going to make it about this size, and now we can kind of draw through where we want our river to be. So something like this. I'm just going to give it a bit of wind, so that we have this kind of pattern on our plane now. So now what we can do is we want to go down here to proportional editing, and we're going to enable it, and then we're going to just pull down this plane a little bit, something like that, and this is where our water is going to flow through. And then we can select smooth on the side here and give it some smooth shading. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to press N, and we are going to go down to shading and switch from multi-texture to GLSL, and switch from solid view to textured view. Then we're going to select our lamp, and I'm going to change it to a sun lamp, something like this. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to apply a texture to this. So we're going to select it, we're going to hit tab to go into edit mode, hit U, and then select unwrap. Then we can drag this open a little bit and drag this down, and switch this to a UV image editor. We're then going to go to the materials tab, add a new material, and then we want to bring the specular intensity all the way down to 0. We're going to go into our texture tab and create a new texture. And then we're going to go ahead and open up an image, and I've included a water resource pack with all the textures that we're going to need down in the description, so you can go ahead and download that. But once you have it, you can go into water resources, and we're going to select dirt seamless, and we can open that image up, and now we have a kind of dirt texture on our terrain. So I'm just going to scale that up a bit just to get some more resolution out of it, and then we're going to enable geometry. And obviously this looks horrible, so we can take this down to about 0.1. That should be alright, even lower if you'd like, so maybe 0.05, and I think that's pretty good. So now we're actually going to get to the part where we create the water. So we're going to hit 7 to go into top view, and we're going to add another plane, and this plane is going to act as our water source. So we're going to scale it on the y-axis to kind of fit our riverbed, something like this, just so that this end right here kind of matches the length of the hole that we've created in the terrain. So we're going to scale it a bit more on the y-axis, something like this, so it just matches the size of our terrain. Then we're going to hit Ctrl A and apply scale, and we're going to hit tab to go into edit mode and start subdividing it a little bit, something like this, not too much, because we want to keep as much performance as we can. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to hit U and hit unwrap. Then we're going to add a material to this, and we can name this material water. And this is going to be our kind of water shader material. So the first change we're going to make to our water shader material is to change the specular mode from Cooktor to wordless, that one, and we can bring the slope down to about 0.35, 0.37, somewhere around there. And now what we're going to do is we're going to add a texture to this material. So a new texture, and this is going to be our normal map, so we can rename this to normal, and then we can open the water resources pack and select water normal, and then open that image. So now you see we have this kind of image, but we're going to need to scale it a bit, so hit tab to go into edit mode, and then make sure you're on water normal here. And then we can scale this up a bit and maybe stretch it a bit on the y-axis, something like that. Obviously this is going to depend on what you want as your final product, but I think I'm going to go with something along the lines of that. That looks pretty good. So what we want to do now is we want to go down into the influence tab, and we're going to deselect color, and we're going to select geometry. So you can see what we've got going on here already. What you can also see is that the specular is kind of pixelated, and that looks kind of bad. So we're going to switch the method of bump mapping from low quality to best quality, and now you can see it's all smoothed out. Another thing we're going to do is select smooth shading for this plane. So now what we're going to do is we're going to actually add the color to it. So we're going to go ahead and add a new texture, and we're going to open it up. In water resources we can select mountain reflection, And you can see we have the mountain image here now. And what we want to do with that mountain texture is change it from UV to reflection under the mapping tab. And you can see what we have going on here. It's a whole kind of reflection thing that we have going on over here. So the next thing we notice is that our river kind of bends, and this is just going straight, so we want to kind of adjust it so it fits with the bend. So we're going to hit 7 to go into top view, and then we want to hit Z and tab to go into edit mode. Make sure you have proportional editing enabled, and then select vertex selection. Then we're going to use the C tool by pressing C, and we're going to just select the vertices where the bend is happening, and we're going to kind of move those and just match the bend of the river, so something like this. Once you've done that, you should end up with something similar to this going on, where the plane kind of matches the bend that we have going. Then we're going to switch back to object mode, switch back to texture mode, so we can make some adjustments. And the adjustments we're going to make are we're going to drag this down a little bit so it kind of gets taken up by the terrain. And we want to make sure that the terrain is fully taken up by the water. As you can see here, there's a little bit of a gap. So what I'm going to do is just select the terrain and kind of change the terrain just to fit the water. You can change the water as well, but in my case, I'm trying to avoid bending the UV texture too much. So I'm just going to adjust so that there aren't any gaps. So once you've done that, you'll be able to see that it looks like the water is just sitting there on the land. Next thing we want to do is we want to add some kind of depth to our water, because we do have a bump map, but it still feels kind of flat. So we're going to hit tab to go into edit mode, make sure we have proportional editing turned on, and just select a few random points, and then kind of drag them down a little bit, maybe drag some points up. Just want to create some, up and down kind of depth to the water. So we're just going to move some points up, and we're going to move others down, something like that, just so that we have a bit of depth. And once you've done that, we should have some relatively nice looking water going on here. So the next thing we want to do is we want to add some transparency to it, because it's kind of just metallic and opaque at the moment. So what we're going to do is we're going to switch over from Blender Render to Blender Game. We're going to go into our Materials tab, and we're going to go down to Transparency. We're going to enable transparency, and we're going to drag the alpha value down to about 0.7, something like that. And another thing you want to be careful of is shadows, and these can greatly decrease your performance. But since we don't really need shadows on here, we can just disable all of this stuff right over here. Now you can see on the actual terrain, the water is casting a bit too much of a shadow, so we can just switch off receive for this plane. Another thing we want to do with the water is we want to make sure that under the Materials tab, backface culling is disabled, so that when we're underneath the water, we'll actually be able to see the water from below it. Then what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate our sun lamp, and we're going to rotate it around the other way so that we can see the water from underneath. So now we're actually going to create the movement of the water, because if we hit play at the moment, it's not really doing much, it's kind of just sitting there. And we're going to use a little bit of Python scripting for this, so we can switch over to the game logic mode. We're going to select our water, and we're going to add an always sensor as well as a Python controller, and then we can connect those two. Then we can create a new script, and we can call this water.py. The script that I'm going to use was not invented by me. I will leave a link in the description. Credits to that guy for creating this script, and thank you so much. But let's get writing the script. And in the script, we're going to type import bge, and that's going to import the Blender Game Engine library. You can zoom in a bit here. And then we're going to define our controller. So cont is equal to bge.logic.getCurrentController. And then we're going to define our owner, which is equal to controller.owner. So basically the way this scrolling script is going to work is by getting each vertex and increasing its UV coordinate values to basically shift the texture along. So we're going to say mesh is equal to own.meshes 0. So what this line is going to do is it's going to get the first mesh attached to this controller, which is this water mesh right here. The next thing we want to do is we want to get the list of vertices contained by this water mesh, and we're going to do that by saying verts is equal to mesh.getVertexArrayLength. And this is basically going to return the amount of vertices that we have on this plane. And the way we're going to use this value is by creating a for loop, which will basically cycle through each vertex and shift the texture along. So we're going to create that for loop now. So for I in, and we're going to create a range from 0 to verts. So this will create a range from 0 to this length of vertices, and that'll give us the full amount of vertices. Then semicolon, enter, and basically what we're going to do here is we want to get each vertex, we want to get the UV of that vertex, then we want to change that UV and apply the changes. So the first thing we want to do is we want to get the vertex, and the way we're going to do that is by typing point is equal to mesh.getVertex 0 and I. Then we want to get the UV of the vertex, so we can say UV is going to be equal to point.getUV with 2 brackets on the end. So now we have that UV, and this UV basically returns 2 values. It'll return an X value and a Y value of each UV coordinate. So we're going to change both of those. So UV0 will be the X coordinate and UV1 will be the Y coordinate. So now we actually want to be able to change these, and we're going to create 2 properties so that we can change this to whatever value we want. So with the water mesh selected, we're going to add 2 game properties, and we're going to name the one to X and the one to Y. So we want to add this value to UV0, and the way we're going to do that is by saying plus equal own, and then the property name, which is X, and we're going to do the same for the Y coordinate. So plus equals own, and then the name, which is Y. So after we've set these values, we need to apply the changes, and to do that, we're going to type in point.setUV UV, and that's going to set that value. So now we can add the Python script to our Python controller, and we can set true level triggering to true. Then we want to actually add a value to increase by, so we want it to move along this direction, which is the y-axis. So we're going to increase the y by 0.1. Now if we hit play, we can see it's moving really fast, and that's kind of a problem. So the way we can change that is by just dividing each value by 1000, and that will allow us to kind of fine-tune the movement without having to set very small numbers. So you can divide each value by 1000. Now if we hit play, we can see that the water is moving extremely slowly, so we can actually increase that. And now you can see that it's moving pretty decently. The only thing we need to change is the direction, so we can set the y value to about 0.3 and the x value to about 6. And now we have nice flowing water. But there are some changes that I want to make. I want to go into the materials tab and maybe decrease the transparency by increasing this value, something like that. So what will make this water look like it has more depth is if we increase the normal value. So we're just going to drag this up, go over to the textures tab and come down to the influence tab, and then we can increase the normal value to about 5, and you can see that gives the water some nice roughness. And if we hit play now, we can see we have some very nice water going. So the next thing we want to be able to do is we want to be able to jump into the water. And to do that, we're going to need a character. So we're going to delete the main camera that we have in the scene. And you can either add your own character, or you can import the new first person template that I've uploaded to Drive. There's a download link in the description for that if you want it. But if you have that, you can hit Shift F1, and we're going to go into the blend file. We're going to go into the objects, and we're going to import the cube and the camera. Then we can append those from library, and now we have our character over here. So if we hit 0 and we hit play, you can see that we can move around by the water, but we can't go into it. We just kind of stand on top of it whenever we try, which is a problem. So what we're going to do is we're going to select our water mesh. We're going to go to the physics tab, and we're going to select ghost, as well as enabling collision bounds and selecting convex hull. So now if we hit play, we can fall through the water like this, and that's good. We can now finally be, under the water. But the problem we have now is that it looks the same underwater as it does on top of the water. So what we're going to do to change that is we're going to create a new scene for a color overlay. So we're going to add a new scene. We can call this scene overlay. And we can hit 7 to go into top view, then hit Shift A and add a camera object. Then we can hit Control Alt and numpad 0 to set the camera to the height that we're at. and we're going to add a plane. Then we're just going to scale that plane up so it takes up the entire camera. Then we're going to add a new material to this plane, and we're going to set it to shadeless. What we want to do then is set the color to a kind of blue-greenish kind of color, somewhere around there, and we want to drag the brightness down to about here. Then we're going to go ahead and enable transparency and bring the alpha down to about 0.3. We can also go ahead and disable all these shadow settings. So now we're going to go back onto our main scene, and what we want to do is we can just hide our player so long by pressing H. We want to select the camera, hit space to search, and type in snap, and then select cursor to active. Then what we're going to do is we're going to add a cube object, just like this, and we're going to scale it down to about here, and just bring it up so that it matches the height of the camera. So somewhere around there should be okay. Then we're going to hold down Shift and select our camera, hit Ctrl P, and parent to object. So now we're going to select our cube object, and we can rename it to sensor, just like that. Then we're going to hold down Shift and select our camera object, and with both of these selected, we're going to add a collision sensor to the sensor object, and we're going to change it from material to property. We're then going to select our water material, and we're going to add an AND controller and connect these two. Then under camera, we're going to add a scene actuator, and we're going to add an overlay scene. We're going to select our overlay scene, and we're going to connect our AND controller to our overlay scene actuator. Then we're going to add a NAND controller, connect our collision to our NAND controller, and we want to add another scene actuator, and then set it to remove scene. Then we can connect our NAND controller to the remove scene, and we can select the overlay scene. So now what we want to do is we want to make our terrain a little deeper so that our camera can actually get underneath it. So we're going to hit tab to go into edit mode, and we're going to select a bunch of faces underneath. Make sure proportional editing is turned on, and we can just drag those down a bit, something like that. And under the physics tab, we want to change from static to sensor mode, and then we want to enable collision bounds. The next thing we want to do is we want to select our water mesh, and we actually want to create something to collide with, because right now it's just a plane. So we're going to hit tab to go into edit mode, we're going to select everything, and we're going to hit extrude, and we're just going to drag it down until it is fully clear of this floor, so just below the bottom of the riverbed, somewhere like that. Now if we hit 0 to go into camera view and we hit play, we can see that when we're under the water, it adds the overlay scene, and it takes it off when we're out of the water, just like that. Now obviously we want it to be a bit darker, so I'm just going to change this, and I'm going to add a little bit more opacity, maybe about 0.7, and I'm going to change the color to be a lot darker like that. So now if we hit play, you can see we have a much darker kind of filter under the water, and that's looking very good. The next thing we want to add is chromatic aberration, which is like a kind of distortion at the sides of your lenses when you're underwater. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to use the post-processing add-on by the Timster, and I'll leave a download link for that in the description. Once you've downloaded that zip file, you basically want to go to File, User Preferences, go to Add-ons, select Install from File. You want to go to the file where you've downloaded it, select the zip file, and click on Install from File. Then we can just search for it and make sure that it's enabled. Then you want to hit Save User Settings, and you can close User Preferences. Now what you should see under your Render tab is a Post-Processing Filters tab, and we're going to use that to add chromatic aberration. So to do this, we're going to select our camera, then we're going to select Chromatic Aberration, and we're going to add the filter, and you'll see we have an aberration amount on the side here as well as the filter which has been added right over here. So what we want to do is we want to turn off this always filter by deleting it, and we're going to connect it to the water collision sensor we have on our sensor object. So now if we hit 0 to go into the camera view and we hit play, you can see when we're underwater we have that chromatic aberration effect on the side of our lens. But the problem now is that when we go out of the water, it doesn't change, and we still have that chromatic aberration effect. So what we want to do is we want to add a filter 2D actuator. We want to select remove filter and make sure the pass number is the same as the one on chromatic aberration, and we want to connect our NAND sensor to that. So now if we hit play, if we go underwater, you can see we have chromatic aberration, and when we leave the water, there's no more chromatic aberration. Then we can increase the aberration amount to about 1.1. So now what we want to do is we want to allow our character to kind of drift along with the stream instead of staying still while he's in the water. So to do that, we're going to add a collision sensor, and we're going to set it from property to material, and we're going to select the water material. Then we can close that, and we can add an AND controller and connect these two together. Then we're going to add a motion actuator onto the end, and we're going to set the force on the y-axis to about -10. We also want to make sure we disable local. Then we can rename this to drift. We can close it, and we can connect it to our AND controller. And now you can see that if we hit play and we jump into the water, it's going to kind of carry us along with the current unless we get out of it like that. Something you'll notice is at the end of our water mesh here, we have these faces kind of rendering through the water, and it really looks bad. And the way that we can fix that is by selecting our water mesh, going into edit mode, and simply selecting these faces, hitting delete, and deleting the faces, and now you can see that we no longer have that problem. And the last thing we want to do is add a nice calm river sound. I got this one from freesound.org. I'll include a link in the description. Then we want to enable 3D sound. And now we have a very nice river. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this tutorial was useful in some way. I'm going to release another tutorial on how to actually create different sounds when you're in and out of the water, because that's a whole other video on its own. But thank you for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this, copy paste those dislikes, copy paste those likes, whichever tickles your fancy. And I will see you in the next tutorial. Cheers, guys.